And welcome back to Witch's Castle. I'm Will Castle, and today I'm bringing you another deck tech. Today it's just a commander deck, no competitive inkling towards it, but it is definitely a deck that will certainly make people hate you a little bit. Today we're talking about Lantern Control in Commander. This is a bit of an oddball for Commander. Lantern Control was actually a popular deck in Modern that was running this Lantern of Insight down here as basically the linchpin card of the deck. Generally, the idea was to find and establish Lantern of Insight as early as possible, and in 60 card formats like Modern, where you get 4 copies of everything, it was a little easier to get a hold of and more consistent. So you'd find one of these and just use it to maintain control of the top of their deck for the entire game. Everything in the original deck was just designed to be able to get this card, protect it, and remove things that were on top of your opponent's library that you didn't want to deal with. The original deck's goal was not necessarily literally to win the game. If you look at the old list, there's no big whammy hitters, there's no big ridiculous control creatures like we're used to. The original pilot himself was like, yo dog, this deck is not here to win, it's just here to make it so your opponents can't win. And they'll eventually just give up at that point. So I tried to keep as much of that spirit in this 60 card, or not 60 card, wow, in this commander deck. So we've got our Lantern of Insight, and let me go dig it up again real quick. For those of you who don't know what it does, it's a single mana artifact, and it says each player plays with the top card of his or her library revealed. And then you can tap it and sacrifice it to have target player shuffle his or her library. So the idea is to get it out and just kind of watch what's on top of people's libraries and use various things like the Pyxis of Pandemonium or Codex Shredder, Ghoulcaller's Bell to remove those cards before they even get into your opponent's hand. And the card we're running for our commander is Surku, Dimir Lobotomist. So he says, whenever you play a blue spell, remove the top card of target library from the game. Whenever you play a black spell, remove the top card of target library from the game. Your opponents can't play non-land cards with the same name as a card removed from the game with Surku, Dimir Lobotomist. So a lot of people have built this guy before. He's kind of an old school classic. And a lot of the decks usually end up being straight up mill decks, where the goal is literally just to get rid of all of their cards, period. That's not quite what we're using him for. We're here to use him to surgically remove all of the cards that would make it so our opponents can win the game. We're not necessarily there to make them mill 10 cards and lose like all of their lands. They can have lands. If they don't have any spells to play with the lands, they can't win the game. So we're going to use it more surgically to try and pinpoint and remove specific things. And if we're lucky, the first time we see a couple Soul Rings or Arcane Signets, because we can block our opponents from being able to cast those cards again, it makes it like a key target that you want to point things at with Surku. So one of the things we need to really look for, if that's going to be our strategy, is redundancy in that kind of effect, where we either have total access to the top cards of our opponent's library the whole time, or have ways to take a peek at those cards in between finding our Lantern and various stand-ins. We have Wizened Snitches. It's a 1/3 flyer, and it says players play with the top card of their libraries revealed. It's not as helpful as the Lantern, because the Lantern can just make something go away in the worst case by itself, and it's certainly not as cheap, but when we're leaning into that specific of a weird archetype, for now, until we get better options like the Wizened Snitches or the Lantern, we're kind of going to have to keep using this. So we'll run the Snitches, and then there's a couple of other cards in here. Where is it? This one. Field of Dreams. The top card of each player's library is always face up. This card's Boogo Bucks expensive because it's an old Legends card, and I don't think it's ever been reprinted, and I don't know if it can be. It might be a reserved list card. But this is the other best option if you don't have Lantern. If you can find and get a hold of a copy of this, this will be your second best pick. And then we're also running Telepathy and Telepathy style effects like Zur's Weirding to help us kind of control what's already in our opponent's hands. The original Lantern control deck worked as well as it did because the pilots had good knowledge of the meta that they were going into and knew what cards to look for to keep their opponents from being able to win the game. There were often games where people would have creatures in play against Lantern control, but none of them were ones that could do anything to make them win because the pilots knew what to take out and what to prioritize and what to just let go because it didn't matter, basically. But in Commander, you have 2 other opponents to deal with, so you need to have a lot more knowledge, a lot more meta knowledge in the game to be able to use it effectively and to make up for some of the parts that we don't have redundancy for. If we can't look at their top cards all the time, let's just look at what's in their hand and use some tools to take those cards out too. So Telepathy, easy, immediately. Opponents play with their hands revealed, super convenient. We've got Zur's Weirding in here. They play with their hands revealed, and then if a player would draw a card, he or she reveals it instead. Then any other player may pay 2 life. If a player does, put that card into the owner's graveyard. Otherwise, that player draws the card. So this also gives the choice to your opponents, and they can totally use it on you. But frankly, your whole deck is just weird, obscure pieces like this. If they tell you no, put it in your graveyard, you're just going to look at the next one and try to use that. You're here to use this mostly yourself to try and keep people from drawing cards. And if they choose to, then they're choosing to also deal damage to themselves to prevent you from drawing cards. And in a deck that doesn't really have a lot of ways to deal damage to people, that's totally fine. It's a obscure, weird blue-black control deck. There's going to be some weird cards in here, and I feel like the weird mini-game that this brings is kind of worth it for the fun factor alone, personally. Along the line with cards that we're playing because they make all players play with their hands revealed, we have Wandering Eye up here. It's another one of these weird creatures that is absurdly expensive for the same effect that we know we could pay 1 mana for. But redundancy. You don't need me to keep saying it because it itself is redundant. But let's get into some of the funner creatures we're running in the deck. We have Cathartic Adept is another Ledger Shredder basically for us in the deck. We've got Archaeomender. Enigma Eidolon might actually get cut. It's very expensive for a card that actually doesn't get returned to hand a whole lot. So I'll be looking at a better option than this card here soon. Let's see here. Grimoire Thief. This one's fun. So when it becomes tapped, remove the top 3 cards of target opponent's library from the game face down. You may look at cards removed from the game with him, and then you can sacrifice them to return them all face up, and then counter all spells that have the same names as them. So it kind of does the same kind of thing that Circu does, where you're trying to yoink cards with it that you know multiple opponents will be playing, and then you can try and flip them over and be like, aha, you don't get me, because there's 3 white decks at the table, and I flipped a Swords to Plowshares. Guess what, guys? It's really not something that gets seen at a lot of Commander tables, because it's kind of spiteful and rude. But this deck is stall the game out and keep people from winning, not necessarily winning itself. It's kind of here to make people rage quit a little bit. We've got a handful of trinket, you know what? I'm going to call them trinket creatures. I've decided I'm patenting that now. Don't sue me, Wizards. Trinket creatures. So the ETB and go find an artifact with like Mana Cost X or like the Tribute Mage for 2 or Trinket Mage for 1. These guys go and find your Lantern and or your Codex Shredder early on, so if you're trying to develop Circu, you can use those to still kind of mitigate the things a little bit. and it's really, really important. You do want to try and establish as many of those mill or remove top card type creatures and pieces as quickly as possible, so that once you actually establish Circuit and your Lantern, you can immediately start reaping the benefits of it. You're not necessarily always immediately going to race to go get Lantern, because people won't always know immediately what you're doing. They'll see a Circuit and they'll be like, okay, it's probably a mill deck, it'll be a little rude, whatever. And you just throw out all these teeny tiny random mill pieces, totally chill. Admittedly, I'm not the first person to come up with Lantern control for this, but I will say waiting to drop the actual Lantern piece, or the piece that makes it clear that you're trying to do what you're trying to do, until you have a little more understanding of the game itself that's happening, will be an advantage to you. You want to take your time to kind of develop the pieces you need and see what is happening before you go and race for that. But you do want to go get it. Another one of our trinket creatures is this Loyal Inventor. We're not really running any assassins in here. I actually don't think there is any assassins in here. There might be one that gets swapped in for this Enigma Eidolon. By the time you watch this video and come to look at the deck list, this card's probably going to be gone. But Loyal Inventor lets us get our Lantern again pretty easily. And admittedly, we are running some other hot artifacts in here. Ensnaring Bridge, the One Ring. This card is here literally just because we will run out of cards otherwise. The synergy that we're trying to accomplish pushed this particular build away from a lot of good ways to draw cards, but because we're already leaning into an artifact tutoring strategy, putting the One Ring in here just makes sense. It gives us a card draw engine that could also very well protect our Lantern if we needed to. We're also running Possessed Portal. If a player would draw a card, that player skips that draw instead. At the end of each turn, each player sacrifices a permanent unless he or she discards a card from his or her hand. So this does both of the things we wanted to. It stops them from getting more cards into their hand and forces them to get rid of cards and or permanents. This is one of the cards that once you've developed and sat for a little bit, you're going to actively try to see. There's not a whole lot of... There's tutors, so you can go and find this after you've gotten your Lantern. This is kind of the, alright, I've gotten control of the board state long enough now. We play this, and if people don't do anything about it, they're just going to probably have to concede. Like, at a casual table with as much control as you're trying to maintain of what they have in their hand, this card's as close to an actual win condition as it gets for this deck. We're also running Ensnaring Bridge, helps protect us from attackers, and truthfully, if you just empty your hand because you've been using your hand to steal cards out of their hand, this card just gets better and better for you. We're also running Pithing Needle and Disruptor Flute style effects. One of the few cards that we will never be able to, like, in theory, permanently deal with is People's Commanders. They can, in theory, always have access to that. That's part of why a deck like this might not always be as strong, is that fact. Luckily, there's plenty of ways to sort of almost perma get rid of a commander if they don't have the right interaction. Putting Oubliette on somebody's commander, if they're not running green or white to be able to get rid of this enchantment, will phase it out, and that's not it changing zones, so it just stays phased out for forever, and that's a good way to make sure they can't recast it to gain value out of it. We're also running Pithing Needle and Disruptor Flute for those exact reasons. We're going to use these cards to try and prevent commanders from being used or actively effective. I think there's one other one up here somewhere. Yeah, Phyrexian Revoker. We're running all of these cards to literally just hate People's Commanders out of the game. The goal is to keep them from winning. You need to keep them from being able to use the one card they always have access to. And then let's take a look at our Planeswalker suite here. So we've got Ashiok here. She makes it so our opponents can't search their libraries for things. That'll help prevent them from getting answers to what we're doing. And then she has a -1 that is a mill ability. So we can use her to mill somebody for 4, and then it exiles each opponent's graveyard. So one of the things that our deck does accidentally do is feed graveyard decks, because so many of our pieces do put cards from libraries and hands directly into the graveyard. we need ways to make sure that once we put them there, we can get rid of them so that our opponents can't use them to try and regain advantage, basically. We're running Narset here to prevent our opponents from drawing extra cards. We can't really let them draw more cards than we can remove from them, basically. So anytime we can find effects like this, we can and will run them. I've got Tezzeret the Seeker in here because he's going to help tutor for our lanterns or any of our other artifacts we need. I mean, he can tutor for a Run Ring, which is pretty cool. And the +1 to be able to untap 2 artifacts will either give us mana or extra uses out of some of our Codex Shredder style effects. And then Jace the Mind Sculptor's in here, both because I really adore this card and just because all of his abilities do pretty much everything we want. The +2 is look at the top 2 or the top card of target player's library. You may put that card on bottom of that player's library. This is called Fate Sealing in Magic. There's actually a card that does something like that in here. Yeah, Fate Seal 2. You look at the top 2 and then you put any number of them back on top or bottom. In this particular instance, it's just Jace's +2, which is obviously super helpful. We're trying to look at and manipulate top cards. If we don't have a Lantern in play, this ability will help us kind of fill in the gap while we try to find a way to get that foresight again. The 0 is Brainstorm. Brainstorm's just good. -1 is return target creature to its owner's hand. And then we're going to talk about the hand attack cards we're running in here. We are running a bunch of stuff that is actively trying to interact with and otherwise remove things from our opponent's hands. We're running Grief, free hand attack on a creature, Despise, Inquisition, Thoughtseize, Duress, Lay Bare the Heart, just because I like that one a lot. It's not necessarily the best one, it's just one I like. Cabal Therapy, and then we've got Dream Salvage to help us recover some cards. If we shotgun through a couple of hand attack spells in a turn and can use this to recoup some of that, that'll help us get a little more advantage over the top and be able to maintain the control we need over the board. One of the other ones we've got in here is Tiny Bones Joins Up. This one, when it enters any number of target players, each discard a card, everybody that isn't you. And whenever a legendary creature enters under your control, any number of target players each mill a card and you lose a life. This will only really ever trigger for our commander. But with a Lantern in play, if you haven't cast your commander yet and you have Tiny Bones Joins Up out and you know you want to remove that card, casting your commander will be good enough in this particular instance. We've also got Seer's Vision in here for more looking at people's hands, and you can actually sacrifice it to look at a player's hand and choose a card from it and make them discard that card. It's at sorcery speed, but this gives us both of those effects that we're looking for. Psychic Surgery is another tutor hate card. It says whenever an opponent shuffles his or her library, you may look at the top 2 cards of that library. You may exile one of those and then put the rest on top of that library and in any order. First of all, the Lantern can be used to just make this happen, so you get to interact with their top cards if it's a really, really bad emergency. But yeah, this is one of our, okay, you're gonna go look for an answer. I'm gonna make sure that you're not drawing anything else after you get that answer, dog. You're gonna go crack a fetch land, you're gonna do pretty much any other game action in Magic. I'm gonna make sure it hurts a little bit and you don't get the advantage you actually need out of it. That's basically the goal of the deck. And then I think that's we're going to talk about one or two of these random one-off spells that I haven't yet. Cruel Fate's in here just to look at the top cards and interact with them. It's neat. Could be swapped out for something else if you prefer. Fabricate, Artifact Tutor. We just need more of them. Reconstruction will help us get our Lantern out of our graveyard. Whatever other card you'd like to slot into this spot, you totally can. I just like old school art, so this is one I picked. Argivian Restoration, same thing. Just trying to get our Lantern back if it gets removed. And then we're running 2 board wipes. We have, 3 technically. We have Bantu's Last Reckoning. I just like it because it's cheap, and we really don't need our lands a whole lot if we establish the Lantern plan correctly. And then Damnation, because it's simple, it's 4 mana, it's cheap, gets the job done. Down here in Instance, we're also running Cyclonic Rift, Deadly Rollick, because it's free once we have our commander out, Snap, because it's basically free once it untaps the lands for you. Whir of Invention is another tutor, Vampiric Tutor, we've got Demonic Council, Demonic Tutor in here, Imperial Seal. These are all cards that we're using just to go find Lantern, and then once we have that, the parts we need to support it and win. And that's it, folks. Thank you guys for swinging by today and checking out this deck. I actually decided I wanted to rebuild this deck or rework on it. I've built Lantern Control before in various forms, but didn't really like it too much in the ways that I had. But I just rewatched the Rhystic Studies video about Lantern Control and the philosophy behind it, and I really liked it. It really inspired me to want to pick this up and interact with it some more. I don't play a whole lot of Modern, so I really wanted to see if I could try and push it into a Commander sphere. And hopefully you guys will be getting some gameplay videos here soon. We're kind of working on getting everything established right now over here. The long-term goals for the channel is that it's going to cover a breadth of various gaming content. I just happen to have more accessibility to Magic content right now, just with the state of the construction of the channel, so to speak. But you can look forward to seeing more stuff like this, the deck techs and everything, from us here at Witch's Castle. I've been Will Castle. Please go ahead and step down below to give us a subscription, a likey-do, and a ring-a-ling, so that you can basically never stop hearing from us, because that's how the internet works nowadays. Thank you guys again, and I hope you have a good day. Bye.